Howdy, folks. Nathan here with Nathan to the Rescue. I can't stand the name of this show. And I have a special guest. Now, first of all, right now we're all going through an unusual time, a difficult time, and one that a lot of car buyers are having an issue with. I've had many emails. TFL has had many emails that have been coming in saying, should we buy a car now? Is this the right time to buy a car now? Please help us with basic decisions on whether or not we should even be doing this. So we looked at that and we thought, maybe it'll be a good idea to bring in a professional, not some used car dealer who's on a lot right now who would sell his mother in order to get a sale, but somebody that we know personally and have some history with, who can give you guys some great suggestions. And so my special guest is Michael Cotsworth, and he's based in Castle Rock, Colorado. Now, real quickly, Michael, among other things, is a true car guy, has done some amateur racing. Sorry, Michael, is amateur racing the right way to say it, or should I?
Well, I think still technically, I get paid occasionally, but not very much, so it's amateur racing.
Okay, fair enough. Michael is one of the former presidents of the Rocky Mountain Automotive Press Association. I've known him for about, almost 10 years, I'd say, Mike. And he has a ton of experience with procuring cars, selling them, getting customers to the right car. So we want to get right into this and talk about the whole process of what's going on right now, and is it a good time to buy a car? So, Michael, is this the right time to buy a vehicle?
Well, thank you, Nathan. Appreciate the introduction. Again, the answer is yes and no. It depends whether we're talking new car, used car. It depends upon how much specificity a customer has about exactly what they're looking for. But speaking to new cars for a moment, most of the dealerships I've been doing business with have a pretty good inventory of new cars, and they're anxious to sell new cars. So yes, from that perspective, it is a good time. There are deals to be had. Dealerships are going to great lengths to make it easy and convenient for customers to buy vehicles remotely. They've introduced things that used to be unheard of in the new car industry, of delivering vehicles to people's homes, of doing true purchases online. So with respect to the ease of a transaction and the motivation of dealerships, yes, this is probably a good time to buy. There's a lot of very inexpensive financing out there. GM, for example, is 84 months at 0%. I mean, that's free money. So that's pretty cool. The possible downside is that, as we all know, all of the manufacturers, or most all the manufacturers, have closed their plants. So we're limited to the inventory on hand. As I say, most of the dealerships I know have pretty good inventory, but when that starts to thin out, we're 6, 8 to 10 weeks away from any new inventory once things open again. So sales are slower, so inventory is not being diminished at a great rate, but it will go down. And accordingly, there'll be fewer choices in the new car world as that inventory goes down. And dealerships are also anticipating a pin-up demand, a rush whenever things open up again. So there'll probably be a lot of activity, and that may further reduce inventory and perhaps reduce some of the motivation dealers have to be real flexible.
There's a lot of talk about automakers right now dealing with that, and the fact that they've had to stop or slow down production significantly. And as such, they're going to have a year approximately of really good car deals, even if everything lifts in the next, say, 3 or 4 months and everybody's back at the dealerships, that prices are going to remain low so they can take that backlog and get it moving and get the flow moving again, because the percentage of vehicles they're building versus the profits are just off the scale right now from where they normally are. But the good news is, for consumers, I would imagine, I've heard stories of people being able to buy a Chevy Silverado for the same price as a Chevy Spark. Now, I know that might be an urban legend, but I'm hearing of some really good deals.
Dealers are definitely, as I said, motivated to make deals because it's more difficult. I hear dealers who typically sell 10 to 12 vehicles a day are now talking about 3 or 4 vehicles a day. So that's obviously a tremendous reduction in sales, and that has an impact on the overall economic viability of dealers. So yeah, there is motivation there, and I agree with you, Nathan. I think that will continue for several months, as you say, quite possibly a year. It's going to be a good environment.
Yeah. Now, let's go to what you do and who you are. From what I understand, you are basically a broker. You're somebody who brings the client the car that they want. And that might sound basic to some of you guys, like, well, wait a minute, I can go online and find it. But in many cases, there are vehicles that are hard to find with everything you need or everything you want. And Mike, if I'm right, this is what you specialize in. Am I correct?
Essentially, yes. Really, there's 3 components to what I do and what other brokers who are true brokers do. One is that which you mentioned of being able to find the specific vehicle that a client wants. And the subset of that is a broker ideally deals with one client at a time, looking for whatever they want. We aren't limited to the inventory we might have in stock. We can go to any dealer, any wholesaler, any source to find the right vehicle for the client. So that's one thing, finding vehicles. The other is pricing. Generally, we can get better pricing than a consumer can. I buy several hundred cars a year, so I buy differently than someone who buys one car at a time. And I have relationships with dealers that afford me pricing as a repeat buyer that a consumer doesn't necessarily have access to. And the third thing is convenience. And that is that working with a good broker, the client never has to, deal with the salesman, never has to go through the negotiating game, never has to set foot in a showroom unless they choose to. We can bring vehicles to clients to test drive. We can do deliveries at their home. Of course, that's not so unique anymore, as I said, that's sort of a new component, and we'll see if that continues after the shutdown. But so those 3 things: access to more inventory, pricing advantage, and overall convenience.
Now, one of the things that a lot of people are looking at right now, some people believe that used car sales are diminishing and thus becoming more expensive, and others think it's the opposite. And I'm curious to what your take is on that. Is now the right time to buy a used car?
Well, as opposed to the discussion we had a few moments ago about new cars and about the motivation of dealers and whatnot, the used car market's a little more complicated now, primarily because for most used car buyers, they have to see the car. I mean, if you buy a new car, if you buy a new Silverado, all you have to really deal with is color and options. You know what the car is. If you're buying a used Silverado, you really probably want to see the car. You want to smell the car. You want to look at what condition it's in. You want to actually physically experience the car. That's obviously more difficult now with people being quarantined, with a lot of dealerships closing their showrooms to the public and only dealing online. So it's more complicated to buy a used car. I see in the private party sector, which is obviously sort of the third alternative for buyers. I mean, there's franchise dealers, there's independent dealers, and then there's the open private party market, again, speaking to used cars. And that's slowed down tremendously for the obvious reason that people aren't anxious to go meet some other stranger and show their car or go look at some stranger's car. So that's slowed down. So it's a complicated market. Again, it's slowed down in general, so there's lots of motivation out there. But the very act of going and looking at a car and comparing and then consummating a transaction is not as easy as it was before.
It's interesting. I never would have thought the world would exist where buying a used car is a more difficult proposition for a person than buying a new car. And that really does seem like where we are right now. Now, you brought up something that I was leading to my next question. Now, I recently had experience buying from one of the online car dealerships, and they deal with primarily used vehicles. And the one I worked with was Carvana. And I would say 90% of the process I had was very positive. There were some negatives to it, but I wanted your take on it because right now, in my mind, organizations like that, Carvana and some of the other ones that are out there, I think there's like 5 major ones that are
Hmm.
currently like really vying for, top level. They're all a little bit more popular right now because the idea is, oh, will they bring the car to you? Of course, the negatives are you're not testing the vehicle unless you go to one of their outlets. They are used vehicles. You're not able to really negotiate much of a price and some other things. So I wanted your take on those organizations, Mike.
Well, Nathan, you've pretty much outlined the pros and cons of those. And I think that more and more online buying, automobiles included, is certainly the wave of the future, if you will. Um, the difficulty is just what you said, being able to actively compare vehicles. And for many buyers, some people know exactly what they want. I want a blue 2-year-old Lexus. Great, that's easy. But often it's, I'm not sure what I want, whether I want a car or SUV. Do I want front wheel drive? Do I want all wheel drive? Do I want leather? Do I want cloth? All those options that exist in the used car market, without being able to compare things side to side, it's more difficult. Again, convenience factor, we're all drawn to convenience, and the online services certainly provide that. Um, it's just hard to say what's the best solution. And it's going to be dependent largely on what the consumer needs and wants. And it's getting a little complicated further, a little confused perhaps by the fact that now, as we discussed, dealers are starting to do things more actively online, and they're delivering vehicles. So whether that cuts into the strict online vehicle purchase services, or it's just compatible with that, time will tell. But I think more and more people are going to be buying cars online, somehow dealing with the factor that maybe they'll go out and they'll compare at some dealerships when they're able to do so later on, and then they'll actually make the purchase online. That's a possibility as well.
It's an interesting thing in the near future, hopefully in the very near future, once this is behind us and we're back out there. A lot of people think that the whole dealership experience is going to be completely altered, if not destroyed, by what's currently going on, because people are learning about the convenience of being able to haggle online and work online and not have to go in and meet some guy who says, what can I do to get you in a car today? Or better yet,
Amen.
let me get my manager, or let me talk to my manager. I mean, just and I've dealt with it for years, and obviously I know you have.
Yeah.
And that whole world may actually be on the way out, and it's unprecedented with the amount of change that's currently going on. Some people feel that this might be a golden time to buy a new vehicle, and they might even call it like a Corona buying experience or something along
Mm-hmm.
those lines. I've heard some crazy stuff out there on the internet. So what I want to do is sort of encapsulate our conversation, and I really want your professional opinion. Is right now the time to buy a new car?
Well, two aspects to what you just said before I try and answer that question directly is that certainly the market's changing. And it was changing already somewhat, where many dealers were moving out of that 1950s scenario you discussed of the used car salesman in the plaid jacket, who's trying to, work a deal. That's been going away because that's so consumer not friendly. But this coronavirus situation has accelerated that process. And I've had that same question in my mind. In fact, I've asked a couple of dealers, will these things you're doing now, the touchless car purchase, as it's often called, the home deliveries, the online emphasis, will that continue after we no longer have to do that? And the answer I've gotten from several general managers is, I hope so. Because it is more consumer friendly. Consumers are more drawn to it. The reason that brokerage businesses like mine exist is because people have such bad experiences through the traditional buying paradigm, if you will. And so I think that there's a good chance that this has accelerated change and may bring about a new era of car buying. Is now a good time to buy? I think if you know what you want, yes, I think it is. If you're willing to go with things a little differently and go through the hoops that are involved with online buying, which are not terribly difficult, but but you do your finance application if you're financing online. Or you look at pictures or videos online, and you go into dealership and you sit in one room and they bring you documents. You never touch anybody or talk to anybody. Again, all those things aren't necessarily bad. And you've got motivated dealers. So again, if the inventory is adequate and you know what you want, I think now is a good time to buy. New cars in particular, used cars a little more complex.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I do appreciate your time with all this. All of us do at TFL Studios. Now, for those of you who don't know, Michael Cotsworth actually has been doing a radio broadcast, Automotively Speaking, I believe was the name of it. And he's done that for several years. And he's evolving that into something very different. And so, Michael, I wanted the people out there to know what your projects are and how they can get in touch with you if they're interested in your car brokerage.
Well, thank you, Nathan. I appreciate that opportunity. As you mentioned, I've been doing both print and online and radio type podcasts for many years. And the radio station is sort of evolving into a video format, not dissimilar from this live video in the sort of the TV mode. And I'm doing my first show tomorrow, as a matter of fact. And the outlet was called Castle Rock Radio, then it evolved into Velocity Radio, and now I think it goes under the name CRCO, Castle Rock, Colorado. It's going to be Castle Rock TV, as I understand it. So that name is still evolving a little bit, but that's going to be available online through the website and then through YouTube eventually as well. My business, Car Connections, I'm online as well, carconnections.us. I've been doing this about 20 years. I'm a car guy. I love cars. I love playing with cars. I love helping people. So I'm out there if anybody would like just some free advice or have me help them find or sell a car. I'm happy to help.
That's fantastic. Michael, thank you so much for joining me and for the whole TFL crowd who's watching, guys. Once again, Michael's one of the people we do trust, and so his opinion is very valuable, and so is his time. So thank you again. And from the TFL Studios, this is Nathan. Guys, take care of each other. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Nathan.
Take care.